Hi guys, welcome or welcome back. My name is Grace. So I have read 4 books since my last video. 2 of them were spectacular and 2 of them were mid. I'm gonna go in order of most favorite to least favorite. So I have 2 thrillers, 1 historical fiction, and 1 memoir. Starting from the very best book, I finished this like 20 minutes ago and I loved it. It's gonna be one of my favorite books of the year. It was The Golden Spoon. The Golden Spoon by Jessa Maxwell. It was so good. It's a kind of a short book. I think it was under 300 pages, something like that. I started reading it last night, but I was too tired to finish it, and I finished it this morning. So what this book is about, it's about this, you have multiple POVs, but it's this baking show in America. So for 1 week, Bake Week is like the biggest thing. Everybody's tuning in. It's what they're watching it. The creator of the show is Betsy Martin. And she films this show in her childhood like manner. So she's always had money, and the way she's described, she's kind of like a Martha Stewart type, just like older, very like well known for her baking and cooking and like home type of thing. And you get her POV and she is not as nice as everybody thinks that she is. And the other POVs are the other people on the show. So the people on the show that have been picked, and they are obviously picked to like kind of play off of each other because they're so different. So you have Gerald. He's very neurotic and he's like a math teacher by day and baking is his passion. And he's just like, you know, like it's just about measurements and being precise. There is no luck or skill, or there's no luck to it. It's just measurements and being precise. That's like his POV on it. And he makes his own flour. He makes his own like ingredients that he brings onto set. You have Prati Munya. He designed an app years ago and he's already a millionaire off of that app. And in his POV, he's just very like empty inside. He's just very like, oh, I'm just a millionaire with nothing to do. Like baking is just fun. And you see for him how different it is to win this competition. Because for everyone else, they think like, oh, this is going to be the biggest highlight of my life to win the show. Because like they win money and a cookbook and like just like endorsement type of deals, which is more than any of them have, you know, can dream of usually. But for him, he's already a millionaire. He's already partied with like famous people. So it's just like, it's just silly fun for him, right? You have Peter, who is an architect, and baking is just like his little passion that he does on the side. You don't get a whole lot of his POV. Him and Gerald, like you hardly hear from him, but when you do, it's a delight because his mind just works so much differently than everybody else's, and he's just so like dry and serious. And then you have Hannah. She's 21 years old and she's just like a baking prodigy from this little town in Minnesota. She started working at a diner making pies and everybody loved her pies, so she started experimenting. So she really wants to get on this show to be famous, and she's like the more traditional one. She's 21, she's young. So to her, this is like a huge deal. You have Lottie, who is the elderly person on the show. She's about Betsy's age, and there's like this friction immediately because a lot of Lottie's recipes would be kind of old-fashioned, and Betsy kind of called her out on that, like, oh, you really use old recipes. And she's like, well, I think they're classic. And you just root for Lottie. And the final one is Stella, who grew up in foster care, and one of the better homes that she was in took her to a bookstore and told her like, hey, you can pick any book you want. And she ended up picking a Betsy Martin cookbook. So she's grown up thinking of Betsy as like this perfect mother figure that she never really had. So she has like a sentimental attachment to Betsy. So when this book opens up, you're in Betsy's POV, and it's like a really bad like rainstorm going on, and her assistant calls her up and she's like, hey, can you go out and check on the equipment and make sure the tent is covered and tight enough so none of the equipment like gets messed up? And Betsy's irritated because she's the star of the show. She's like a multimillionaire. So she's like, this is beneath me. But at the same time, it's kind of her fault because she sends the crew away at the end of each day, even though there's more than enough room in the manor. But she's just so like territorial about her house. She doesn't want people like messing up the flooring or nicking the wood or just like making a mess. So because she's alone in the house, like she can't send the contestants who are also staying in the house. She goes down, and long story short, she sees a body, but you don't know what body. That's how the book starts. and then you flash to a week before this day as the competition is kicking off. But like all the POVs are so good, and you as the reader know things that like other people don't, and it just like ties in together like perfectly. Like somebody's like old job prior to like, you know, this whole show, like their background comes into play, and it helps them like see things in a different way. And it was just really, really good, and it was really funny. So I loved this book. The next book that I really loved was Miss Porter Calling by AJ Pierce. This is the third book in a trilogy. I don't know if there's going to be more, but that's what it is so far. And this is like a series that I didn't realize was going to be a series. I read Dear Mrs. Bird years ago, loved it, and then I realized there was a second book. In the same way I realized like, oh, there's a third book now. Like I don't know, I need to put some kind of alert because I love this storyline. What it's about, it takes place during World War II, and you're in the perspective of Emmeline Lake. She's like really young, she's in her early 20s, and she starts writing. She wants to be a journalist in the war, but she ends up writing at an advice column in this newspaper. And this is like the first book. I'm just trying to catch you up to speed. But she writes this column for advice for women like in their homes, like not necessarily a part of the war effort, but just being like, how am I supposed to like make food when like we don't have food, or like how can I make a meal out of these rations? What do I do if I've gotten pregnant by this man that didn't marry me before he went away? And like all these real problems that she didn't realize were problems, because these kind of situations just kind of get swept under the rug. But she has this feeling like I can help these people. And she settles into like this little newspaper. That was like the first book. The second book, I believe it was about women in the war effort, like working in the factories, but not being taken seriously as men, like as men were. Like they're trying to help out in the war, do what they can because the men are in war, so they're filling in at the factories, but they're being disrespected, not treated, not being paid as well, and also not being supported as far as like child work. And they're like at home, like on the front, like on the home lines, and having no support. So that was the second book. And the third book, you have the newspaper that she works for, the person that ran it passed away, and he left it to his niece. And now this is like, she's the owner. But they have to deal with her just not wanting to take it seriously and trying to derail everything they do, because they are really focused on helping people. And their magazine has actually turned around. It went like from being kind of like this crappy newspaper in the beginning of in the first book to being this newspaper that a lot of women look forward to because it's the only one that takes them seriously. And now you have Miss Porter coming in, who she's like in her late 30s, and she just wants to make it like her personal scrapbook. Like she just wants to talk about clothes that she buys, which most women will not spend that much on clothes. Like she's just very like in a rich people bubble. So she's trying to like make the magazine into like something that it's not, and they're alienating readers. And Emmeline has such a attachment to her readers that it's just like, but it's just like a really good book because you care for all the characters. Like this is a completely different setting, but if you've read Confessions of a Shopaholic, especially like the first few books, how lovable all the characters are, that's how this book is. Like you care about all the characters. And it's very like silly at times, but it's because it's during a war, like very serious things happen that are hard for like the characters to cope with. So it's just a really good book. I really enjoyed it. So now on to the books that I didn't super love. One of them was the first one, and it's like, okay, like these first two books I talked about, 5 stars. This book, I would give it like a 2.5, and it is The Soulmate by Sally Hepworth. I think this book was talked about a lot like a year or two on BookTube. And I remember downloading it, didn't read it, and then I was at Barnes & Noble this weekend, and I saw it in the thriller section, and the cover was like turned out, like, you know, when they're trying to get your attention on like, or like spotlight a book because it's been getting a lot of, you know, it's been on people's radar. So I saw it in my library's like thing, so I just downloaded it. What this book is about, it's this couple, Pippa and Gerard, who buy this cottage on the beach, kind of like on a cliff. And they were surprised that they were able to afford it because it's like this area that's called like Millionaire's Row or something. And as they're about to purchase this house, they realize that the reason why they're able to afford it is because Nobody really wants to buy it in that town because it's right near a spot where a lot of people commit suicide. Like they kind of have like a front row view. So there's always like a lot of police action and just like negativity in that spot. But they go ahead and buy the house. So, and you know what, maybe it's like a 3-star. I think it's okay. I think I was just kind of let down towards the end. Okay, so basically, as they've lived in this house for a year, Gerard, I think that was his name, he has stopped 7 people from committing suicide. So he's just like described by his wife as being very charismatic, very like just like draws people in. He's very good looking and he makes people feel like they are like the center of his universe when he's talking to them. So that's how he's been able to save all these people. Well, in the first chapter, as his book is opening up, this woman is on the cliff and Gerard goes to talk to her and he tells his wife, go ahead and call the police. That way, because it's already like common practice by this point. But this is the first woman that has fallen to her death. And as you're in Pippa's POV, you realize that like what she saw and what Gerald is saying happened aren't adding up. Like the way he says he was standing, the way she saw him standing, and she's getting like this doubt about the whole situation. And the other POV that you have is Amanda, the woman that fell from the cliff. So throughout the book, you're trying to, it's a thriller. So there's all these different pieces that are coming together. As you're reading it, you're trying to discover like what led to these events and what actually happened, what's the background. So I would say like in the beginning, I thought it was really good. And one thing that I thought was really good was how Pippa describes Gerald, because he's kind of like, I think it's a very common type of person that if you've come across, you know, where it's like they're very charismatic and they do so many good things that when they do bad things, it's like night and day. It's like, how can this person also be this person? And the more you read, the more you're uncovering and seeing like things through other people's eyes. So it was good, but I just think there was just a few inconsistencies in the book or like plot holes, I would say, where I'm like, how does this make sense? So like the end felt a little bit sloppy to me, but it was okay. Like I finished it in a day and I was like in it while I was reading it. All right, and now the book that I like the least, and I will tread lightly because this is a memoir. It was More by Molly Roden-Winter. This is a memoir about an open marriage. So I saw this book, like it was a book of the month book. So like you've seen it in a lot of people's like stacks of TBRs. I saw it it just kept popping up in different articles, like the New Yorker, the New York Times, and like, you know, I just kept seeing it. And so I put my request in on the Libby app and I ended up getting one of those skip the line things. So I got the book and I was able to read it. And so this is her personal experience as she went through an open marriage. And I think one thing that would have helped the book a lot is if you knew what year this started in and like a timeline, because it felt kind of like I didn't know how much time had passed between like the start of this and the end of this. But I think like the way it was sort of written kept you wanting to read it, like the way it opened up, because then you're kind of like, okay, well, I need to see this through and how this ends. But I feel like if you don't look so the way this book opens up is she gets a text from her son asking if she and her husband are in an open marriage. And it's her worst fear come to life because she's always kept this from her kids. And then you flash towards when this first started. And basically, when Molly married her husband, Stuart, he had a lot of sexual partners and she hadn't. And he tells her, like, you know, in the future, you're going to want to experiment. And when you do, I'm here for it. So that's like years ago. So that was years ago. And now Molly has like these 2 kids. She's like a newish mom, like they're still very little. And she goes to a bar with her friends and she looks like all disheveled, like her life is not going great because she's tired, exhausted, all the mom things. And she starts talking to this young guy and he's interested in her and she doesn't have her phone with her, but she gives him her number. Meanwhile, her husband at home sees her phone go off and he reads the text. So he asks her like, hey, what happened? Are you flirting with this guy? And he's like pushing her to go out with this guy. And she's finally like, all right, I'll do this. So for the book, you get her experiences in an open marriage as she's like, and in the beginning, she says that when she started this, she looked over her journals from this period and she sees how she was lying to herself in certain aspects, and like, you know, and now she's trying to write the truth of it. But when I finished the book, I was kind of like, I still feel like you don't get it, because I feel like if you objectively, without like religion into it, you can see the benefits, the pros and cons of monogamy and the pros and cons of polyamory. But reading her experiences, it looks like it was all cons. Like it seems like she was pushed into this thing by her husband that she didn't really want and she had to do. But I've seen her on interviews, like I've seen her like little clips here and there, and she is still advocating for polyamory. Like she's still like, hey, this is the lifestyle for me. Even though like I feel like as you read this, it's like it wasn't the lifestyle for her. It was just something that her husband pushed her to do, that she keeps justifying. And at first when I was reading it, I was like, I hope she leaves her husband because he seems awful. But then as the book goes on, and it's kind of disjointed because I feel like it was like a lot of years and it was just kind of like a short book, so you don't get the full story. But at one point when they're arguing, he tells her like, you know, you don't have a problem with polyamory as long as you're happy, but it's when your relationships aren't going well that you just want me to stop mine. And then I was like, okay, well, she kind of seems like the asshole now. And yeah, so in the beginning, she starts dating men that are married, that aren't really like open with it. And she explores the spectrum of polyamory, people that are just like in open relationships, and people that do the whole like, you need to meet my partners and all that, and trying to figure out where she lands on it. But it was just kind of sad reading it. Like I felt like this wasn't something that she was cut out for. And seeing that she's still advocating for it, and I should add that like I've seen her talk to people that are in the polyamory like world, that's what they do, and they praise this book. So maybe I just don't know what I'm talking about. But I was just reading it like, how are you jealous of your partner doing the same thing that you're doing? Like it just seemed really weird. Like, and there were certain instances where they were like perfectly like tit for tat, like what she was doing he was doing, and she would be mad at him. And it was just like, it was just kind of silly. And also the other things that I didn't like were, I mean, like you can't help what you feel. Like if you feel this like despair and depression and anxiety, you feel it. But it just seemed very like rich people problems. Like she didn't have real problems and she was making like huge things out of nothing. And that's how like she described it to her friends. Like she's like, I feel like I'm just packing lunches all day, and one of these days I'm just gonna realize I packed myself in a Tupperware container. And it was just like, it's kind of melodramatic to me. And the other thing I didn't like was that she enjoyed dating younger men. And I feel like, okay, like if you like someone older, if you like someone younger, it's not a huge deal. But the way she put this emphasis on dating younger men and feeling sexy because she was doing that, it just felt kind of gross. And she even imposed like this age limit on her husband where he couldn't date someone younger. Like it was like some kind of math equation where he could not date whatever because she was insecure about that. But it was just kind of like predatory and gross. I felt like that she was just constantly trying to date younger men to feel like she was like winning, you know? And yeah, I read that book like 2 weeks ago, and I haven't really had I needed time to get my thoughts together, and I wanted to see more interviews of her, but I haven't had the chance to do that. I've seen a lot of reviews and a lot of people seem to like this book, so I am like alone on an island in thinking this was like not a great book or like a great retelling, because I feel like if at the end she was just like, you know what, I realized this wasn't for me, then I would have appreciated it more, or if it was written in a way where I felt like she got something out of it. But so far, like I just kind of feel like she'd be happier with a different person. And it's weird because it's a memoir, like that's her life. It's just, that was my takeaway from it. Those are the 4 books that I have recently read, and I'll see you in the next one.